SKORNorth.com.
Love when the ID doesn't fire.
TCL is a proud sponsor of the SKOR North Studios.
It's supposed to fire, and it didn't.
Growing TV brand. It's Purple Daily.
Oh, welcome into Purple Daily. Matthew Coller here, along with ESPN Vikings reporter Courtney Cronin. Courtney, how are you on this beautiful day outside?
Oh, man. I hope we can talk about the cold for the next 30 minutes and really relish in being Minnesotans. Transplant Minnesotans.
I will say that when I look at the map, it's not just us.
No.
So the rest of the nation can't look at us and go, how does anybody live there in Minnesota? Like, hey, Chicago is also suffering from this polar vortex. So it's not just us.
Well, apparently it's going to be colder in Chicago this week. I hear it's from my mom every 15 minutes. I get the updates that it's going to be colder there Wednesday than Siberia, Antarctica, and I think Alaska. I don't know if I believe the Antarctica one.
It's summer in Antarctica.
Yeah, I mean, that's the southern hemisphere, right?
I have no idea if it's summer in Antarctica, but it's not pleasant. So we are in here to help you heat up with football takes.
Some
right?
hot ones.
And we've got a lot to talk about today. There is a Super Bowl coming up if you have not heard, but we are going to focus a lot on the Minnesota Vikings for today's show. Anthony Barr is an interesting conversation. He talked at the Pro Bowl a little bit, didn't say a lot, but I think that there's a really good conversation to have there. I put out a Twitter poll if you want to vote on it at my page, and Manny will retweet this onto the SKOR North page as well. If the Vikings and Anthony Barr could work out a reasonable deal, would you want them to do it? And I will give you those results in a second, but feel free to give us a call to answer that question. 651-646-8255, 651-646-8255. If the Vikings could work out a reasonable deal with Anthony Barr, should they do it? Courtney, you wrote about this at ESPN.com. What is your opinion?
Well, we got to define the term reasonable deal, because what Anthony said at the Pro Bowl via one of my colleagues who's down there, got a chance to speak with him kind of just briefly. I mean, Anthony's not going to ever completely open the door, but he left a little bit of a crack open there. And I think that he kind of has always been like that in terms of, I know what I'm worth. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily feel like I have been playing to the strengths of my position. And I know I can get some more money if I go somewhere else. I mean, he has said that he's wanted to stay in Minnesota for a while. I mean, it's a team that drafted him. The quote exactly is, quote, I want to be back like I've said throughout the last year, but I've also been saying I know my worth and I know what I've got to do. I've got to do it for me. So he said he's going to slow play free agency, kind of let it dictate itself, which I think is a smart thing to do. He's going to have offers elsewhere. I don't think he's back here. I don't think the Vikings can afford to tag him, which would be somewhere in that $15 million range. But if you're asking him to take a reasonable deal, I think he would have done it last offseason, and we wouldn't be talking about it. That's why I just don't see this happening, because realistically, a reasonable deal is not Jamie Collins type numbers. From estimations, it would have been around 10, maybe 11 million last year. Would have been right around what Eric Kendricks got. And I don't think Anthony Barr feels that that is the value for his skill set, which aligns with being a 3-4 outside linebacker, not what he is right now.
There are a lot of different directions to go with the Anthony Barr conversation, which is why I like it. And one of them is Anthony Barr deluded? Like, does he have a good connection with reality here on what he can actually do in the NFL? Because it seems to me, from comments he's made directly to us about his pass rushing, that he fully believes he should be rushing the passer on every play. Mm-hmm. That's what it sounds like every time he's commented on it, and he's gone farther and farther each time we've talked to him. And a quote in your story that I remember him saying to us was, I'm better going forward than backward. And well,
he said that after the Miami game. He reiterated it the following week. I mean, that's been his calling card. Mm-hmm. That maybe he wasn't being used to his strengths, and as to why all of a sudden it felt like this year he gets his first multiple sack game of his career, week 15, and then going forward, it's like, okay, well, what turned on here? I mean, we saw a little bit of it in flashes early in the season, and then it went away, A, because he was hurt, and B, because they just diverted away from it.
And what's looking at the numbers here, what sticks out to me is how consistent Mike Zimmer has been in his usage of Anthony Barr. In terms of his pass rush snaps, they've been about the same every single year, just a little over 100 every season. His rookie year was 115. This year was 103, but of course he missed those couple of games. So if he hadn't, it would have been right around 110, and it's been like that every single year. So Zimmer has not changed up the usage of Anthony Barr very much to make him a pure pass rusher, as we discussed and as Zimmer hinted at a couple of different times, but never really followed through with that. And Barr at one point showed some frustration in that. He said, we always talk about it, and we talked about it in training camp, but it never seemed to really happen, except for that Miami game. There was something schematic there, and he had a huge game. But aside from that, when he rushes the passer, he has a lot of success. Just looking, only 566 pass rush snaps in his career. So that's about a season for a regular pass rusher that's on a defensive end, right? You'd say if they play 1,200 snaps, half of them will be pass rush, half of them will be run, basically, or 1,100 snaps. So an every down edge rusher would rush about the same as Anthony Barr. And he had 103 pressures, which is really, really good for a single season. That would be like among the top, and 14 sacks. So basically, if you were to rush him every play, then he would end up with 14 sacks and 100 pressures. But the problem with that thinking for Anthony Barr is Mike Zimmer is using him in the exact right spots to get those pressures. He is designing and scheming the blitzes so Anthony Barr can come through free, or come through on a running back, or come through on a guard who's trying to double team somebody else up front and has another assignment. And that's a major reason why he's had all this success. So I think Anthony Barr has actually been very good at what he does in Mike Zimmer's defense, and very successful, and he's making Pro Bowls. And he probably should be a little happier with the situation that he has, as opposed to thinking that Zimmer is doing something wrong.
Well, to your point, it almost makes me think off, okay, is he biting off more than he can chew if he really wants this role as somebody who is sent in just about every down to rush the passer? This season alone, like breaking down what you said with his 14 sacks over his career here, he didn't get those sack numbers this year. That would have made his value, I think, skyrocket. But it's still pretty high where it is right now if he wants to transition into more of that role. But 23 quarterback pressures on 94 rushes, that makes him one of the best rushing linebackers in the NFL right now. So I think he's got a case to go wherever he wants to go and be able to expand upon that role. But with that said, he was free on a lot of those rushes. A lot of them are third down blitzes where he just came off the edge and was able to just maul whichever quarterback. A lot of them were the rookie quarterbacks, if you remember.
Yes.
I mean, there's Josh
Or Matt
Rosen.
Stafford.
Yes. But can you do that every single down? Harrison Smith is the one who said he's built like a defensive end. So his teammates see the value in it. His body can probably handle it. But after 5 years of doing something one way, to completely transition into that being your sole role, or a majority of it going forward, do you think he can do it? I mean, I think the proof is going to be within time and seeing, okay, if he does end up outside of this system, how much success he has as a true 3-4 outside linebacker in that Khalil Mack, Von Miller type role.
And I totally understand why he thinks that and why he wants to play that role if he thinks he's a great pass rusher. But it's a little bit different from coming free on a blitz where they overload one side and someone else drops back a zone blitz than it is when you're going up against tackles.
Can he do that regularly?
If you were talking about going up against all-pro tackles, can he really beat them? And I have a tough time thinking that he can. And the reason that I have a tough time thinking of that is because Mike Zimmer does not get these wrong. Like when you go position by position, the things he's asked players to do, he always seems to get it right. Mackenzie Alexander's a good example. That over the first 2 years of Alexander's career, we were thinking, I don't know about this guy. I don't even know if he can play nickel. Like, what is Zimmer thinking? Maybe he should just be a backup. Maybe they should just sign some free agent nickel or try to convince Newman to stick around and stick him at that spot. And then Mackenzie Alexander, after about the third, fourth week of the season, was fantastic all the way through the rest of the year and seemed to catch on to being that nickel corner that Mike Zimmer believed he could be. I mean, you go position by position, and the way these guys are used, Zimmer seems to always know how to maximize their talents. So I have a tough time thinking that he's done something severely wrong. Now, blitzing a little more, we saw that this year, a little more, and it was effective, and Barr was good at it. So maybe that's the answer, is a little more if he comes back. But if Barr thinks that he's going to be Khalil Mack if he sticks at the edge, I don't see that.
To your point about McKenzie, I think some of that too. I mean, yes, it's Mike Zimmer, and it's the schematically what he's doing is what put McKenzie in position for success. But McKenzie changed a lot this year. I mean, he even admitted that his mindset for the position was that, okay, I'm not going to be an outside corner here. This is my best fit. So I think that has something to do with it. But as it pertains to when they're in nickel and they're in that package, that's where I think a lot of Vikings fans aren't convinced that Anthony Barr is the guy who can play middle, who can play in the middle in nickel or blitz all that often. So, I mean, I don't think Mike Zimmer did anything wrong here. I think that he saw a perfect fit for what he wanted to do in this 4-3 scheme, and what with Anthony Barr's strengths outside, I think you can do that. But does a change of scenery hurt? No. Can they afford him? Probably not. Could he go somewhere else and get those sack numbers and he's 26 years old, set himself up for an even bigger payday to a contract from now? I think that's probably his best bet, and that's what he probably means by, I know my worth. I want to bet on myself, and that's probably what he's going to do.
651-646-8255 is the number to chime in. Do you want the Minnesota Vikings to bring back Anthony Barr? I will tell you the results of the poll. Right now, 646 votes, and 70% of Vikings fans on a reasonable deal want him back. And here's why I put reasonable deal, because I think it's possible that Anthony Barr could go out onto the free agent market and think, okay, I'm scoring the big one. Like, I'm going to get $100 million. Somebody is going to make me their starting defensive end or 3-4 outside linebacker. I am the next Khalil Mack, and everybody just hasn't been seeing it. And the rest of the league might go, players like you just aren't as valuable as they used to be if we're not using you in that role. We play nickel all the time. We play dime all the time with one linebacker who's pretty quick and mobile and covers. And if we don't believe you're a defensive end, that's where I circle back to Zimmer. If Zimmer saw anything in practice, in training camp, that suggested he could be a defensive end all the time, I think he would have been using him there as a rotational player over the past few years, as opposed to a double A gap blitz, or then last year they scrapped that and went to the zone blitzing all the time. And both of those have worked really well for Anthony Barr. And with Barr, he's made Pro Bowls year in and year out. Some of them we thought he deserved less than others, but still, he's gotten his awards, his accolades for being a Pro Bowler. He's got successful statistics. Zimmer's changed with him after week 4. The rest of the year in coverage, the most yards he allowed, Pro Football Focus has this, is 30 the whole rest of the year. So he's not even getting toasted in coverage after Zimmer made those changes. It's you might want to consider this to be actually a pretty good position for you. And if you go out there thinking you're going to get Khalil Mack money or something, and someone's just going to take a leap of faith that you're going to get 10 sacks if they put you on the edge, I don't know if that's actually going to happen.
Well, the whole week 4 thing too, I think that's an anomaly.
Totally.
Linebackers are not supposed to be great on speedy slot receivers. Right. That just is what it is. Yet people want to continue to go back to that and what Cooper Kupp did to him. And I think obviously Todd Gurley on the touchdown and Robert Woods too. I mean, there were so many mismatches there. That was an anomaly. And what happened after that? As you said, week 5 on, we saw a much different Anthony Barr when he was healthy. I don't know if betting on yourself, I don't know if he would price himself out of anything. I think you could make, the Vikings are a pretty good option for you because you know this system, you know what's expected of you. And hey, who's not to say that he goes through another training camp and does more with the defensive line and they want to incorporate more of him in there. We don't know how the rest of the team's going to look and how it might morph into something differently. We do know there, obviously the key defensive pieces will be there. Most of them along the defensive line. Sheldon Richardson's still up in the air, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But there could be opportunity for him to continue on this role and maybe even as a blitzer take on more of that responsibility.
So my other Anthony Barr question for you is how good you think Anthony Barr is. And when we look at his Pro Football Focus grades, this year was a good season for him. 2015 was a fantastic season for him. The one really down year was 2016, and I think he was playing with an injury. That's kind of the conclusion that we've come to, because it's the outlier year. And in 2017 and 18, he's been very good overall, especially as a pass rusher. But as a run defender this year, he was good. We see him blow up run plays on a pretty consistent basis. But it is the ups and downs with Anthony Barr that get to be frustrating with you, with watching him, is Is he going to show up this week? Is he going to make big plays this week? But from Mike Zimmer's perspective, when he called a press conference for trade rumors that did not exist, he said a few things about Barr that I hadn't heard before from Zimmer. And one of them was just that opponents always have to factor for Anthony Barr. They have to know where he is. They have to know what he's doing, where he's lining up. And his familiarity with Zimmer's defense and his intelligence allows the Vikings to do a lot of different things. And the fact that they were able to change on the fly this year and fix the defense in the middle of the season has a lot to do with the intelligence and the understanding of Zimmer's defense with Anthony Barr. And I think that there is value to that goes beyond just, does he have a lot of sacks, or what did PFF grade him on his individual plays?
Well, when you look at 2015, because I wasn't here, but I remember going back through that. What changed with him? Well, they stopped using him to rush the passer. And it makes you wonder, why do you think that happened? What changed within the defense where they saw his value there? And after with those sack numbers, and I'm talking about like 2015 to 2016, why did that shrink? And that's where I have the struggle wondering, is that something he can do on a consistent basis? Or is he just better as a situational edge rusher? That's my thought on it. And when you're paying someone, when you talk about paying value for that type of player, I think he might be right in the sweet spot here of what the Vikings can offer him, because I just don't know if that is something he can do continuously down after down, if that is his predominant role.
Let's go to Ben in Blaine here. What's up, Ben?
Hey, yeah, I just wanted to weigh in. I think the writing's on the wall with Barr, especially since they chose not to sign him early on. And I think that, like the stats against the Bears, his grade was like the worst, run stopping grade. And I think just bottom line is, I know we want to make it interesting to keep talking about. I think the writing's on the wall. And I also think that, you got Eric Wilson there, and there's so many holes to fill on the offensive line and things. I mean, we got to have every dollar we can towards other positions that, Coach Zimmer doesn't have to coach up. So that's
a great point, Ben. Thanks for the call. And it might be two different conversations. Would you sign Anthony Barr if you had a ton of cap space? Would you sign Anthony Barr when you know that it's going to take up an important percentage of your cap space? And I think where I stand is, in this current situation, even if it was 4 for 60, say 4 years, $60 million with 30 guaranteed, let's just say that was it. That's pretty tough to fit in your cap. And if I didn't have cap issues, I would be saying, yeah, I think he's valuable to the defense. We saw it with Eric Wilson, where Wilson filled in for a couple games and it was like, oh, that's not too bad. But then opponents realized Eric Wilson was playing and then started to attack him, right?
I think his answer was no when asked if teams scheme for Eric Wilson the way that they have to for Anthony Barr. I think it was a very cut and dry answer, and almost like, are you kidding me? Absolutely not. So, there is value in keeping a guy like this. And when you take a look at all the things that you can align of the dots between the Mike Zimmer and Anthony Barr dynamic. First off, this was one of his, jump on the table for your guy type guys that, he drafted him. It was his first draft pick the year he got here.
Very clear he wants him around.
He wants him here. If the press conference wasn't enough, when there's fake rumors out there that he's unequivocally not being, he used a word that I haven't even heard in a long time, that he unequivocally not being traded. None of that was true.
I've said unequivocally 4 times today. I don't know what you're talking about.
It sounds like a word Stephen A. would usually
use. Unequivocally. He would scream it at you too. So now I hate the word. Thank you both.
He would add 3 more syllables than necessary.
But there's the comments that you heard in 2016. Well, Anthony has a tendency to coast. And then there was, those type of dynamics, like you wonder, is there a tension in the relationship? Should Barr
I think clearly there always has been, at least since then.
And even since then, Zimmer has always come back to, it's that tough love aspect that he gives Anthony. He said he feels like he's playing at one of the highest levels when we asked him in December that he's ever played at. And that, it's basically the question of saying, okay, do you think now he's playing, because he's playing in a contract year, do you think that's why his play's gone to this level? And of course, he's never going to take the bait on that. But I think that there's something to absolutely be said about that, because Barr wants those sack numbers. He wanted those sack numbers to be able to put himself in position to call the shots during free agency, and he still might be able to do that. But what's to say that the shots are not better here in Minnesota in a defense he's familiar with? I know a lot of people get, all up in arms about him in terms of what he can do as a run stopper and not being that great at it. Well, that's why you have a guy like Eric Kendricks, in my opinion.
And his numbers are okay for his career.
I think we overlook all of that, acting like he's just awful. At that aspect.
I got a tweet with someone saying, I don't get the love affair with this guy. Well, I've gotten to the point where when it comes to defensive players, I just believe what Mike Zimmer says because he's always right about them. I mean, Alexander is the best example. I'm not saying that we can never question Zimmer on defensive guys, but he's just always coming up right. Like sticking with Anthony Harris. We were trying to replace Anthony Harris a bunch of times, right?
I was not.
J-Ron Curse or George Iloka.
Look what he did with Holton Hill.
Holton Hill, we were talking about maybe moving to safety, and here Zimmer sticks in Anthony Harris, who he's stuck with for a long time, and he plays great.
I mean, the Trey Waynes argument 2 years ago, too.
Right, and he's stuck with him, and then he's played much better. And so when it comes to Zimmer in defense, if he's saying that Anthony Barr is this valuable and he wants to fight for him, that goes a long way. For me, it's just this internal conflict is very possible now with Anthony Barr between the front office and the head coach, because you know that Zimmer is going to want to fight tooth and nail to franchise tag him, to not let him go because he feels like he's extremely valuable. And what you have is a salary cap that is going to make that almost impossible to franchise tag.
Well, right now it's estimated around $15 million for what you're going to tag him as. Like, the good news is here, there's not going to be any sort of like internal strife with, do we have to tag him as a defensive end? Do we have to tag him as a linebacker? I think the sack numbers there would, if they were at a certain level, you would be running into some issues with agents and what they want for him and what would be considered fair. I think $15 million is definitely considered fair for what he's done so far. I mean, it's after, coming off of his 5th-year option where he made just over $12 million. But
and he keeps making the Pro Bowl. And whether you like it or not, that's
I think he's got some friends in the NFC. Let me just say that. But there is that element of, okay, do you tag and trade him? Like, I mean, given his value and given what you know his value to be and what other teams see his value as, maybe that's your best option. The thought of tagging him and keeping him here at that $15 million and obviously working out a long-term deal beyond that, if I'm looking at numbers, I can't see it happening.
We've got a lot to get to on Purple Daily. Manny has made a list of his favorite Super Bowls of his lifetime.
This was a very hard list to put together, by the way.
Okay, so what year is the earliest? No, wait, don't ruin it. What year were you born?
1984.
Okay, so from 84 on, Manny's favorite Super Bowls. So we're going to go through those. Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus is going to come up next. We're going to ask him about Anthony Barr's value to the Vikings defense, as well as PFF put out its quarterback annual with, I want to say, 100 different statistics that break down every quarterback in the NFL. What did those stats say about Kirk Cousins in 2018 and what he can be in 2019? That is coming up next here on Purple Daily on SKOR North.